Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone to the scale and growth, balancing the challenges of scaling your business. This is the Founders Check In. This is our third Founders Check In, and this is the Founders Check In for May. So if you registered for the scale and growth, balancing the challenges of scaling your business, if that is what you registered for, then you're in the right place. If you're seeing this live and you think, wait a minute, what's Kerry-Ann doing over there? And what's Trafalgar Strategies up to? We are going to be doing a 45 to an hour long workshop on addressing some of the major problems that we have dealing with scaling and growth in small and medium-sized businesses. So welcome in. So before we get started, I want to ask you a question. What is your reason for registering for this workshop, for deciding to join us for this workshop, or for, what is that's happening in your business that is a challenge regarding growing and scaling? So I'd like for you, just off the top of the hat, start typing in what are the issues that you're facing, because there can be many obstacles to scaling your business. So the question here is, what is your problems? What are you facing specifically in your business? Start typing that in the chat. We want to playful out today, and just type that in, and we're going to read it and begin to address it. So go ahead and type that in. While you're doing that, let me introduce myself. My name is Kerry-Ann Powell. I'm the founder of Trafalgar Strategies, which is a business consulting firm for small and medium-sized companies. We work primarily with small and medium-sized service-based companies, professional services. And, exactly who am I? Well, we really believe that we recognize, at least, that running a business can sometimes feel like you're managing a chaotic tornado. Are you right? Am I right? Type right. Yes, I understand. I get it. I feel it. Yes, chaos can sometimes be a part of running a business. But here at Trafalgar Strategies, we really help business owners run their businesses smoothly so they can thrive in business and in life. So we don't believe that just because you want to have a thriving business means that you got to deal with chaos. We believe that you can run your business smoothly by also thriving in business and in life. So that's what we do here at Trafalgar Strategies, and that's who we help. So back to the question. What are the challenges that you are facing in your business around scaling, and what made you decide to join the workshop or register for the workshop today? If you have any comments, let's see them. I'm going to give you some time to still put those in the chat. And by the way, I'm not alone in this. Okay, so we've got two of our team, Edgar and Lovely, that are joining us today, and they're going to be helping to facilitate and make sure that your time here in this particular workshop makes sense for you. Okay, so Edgar, you might hear me say, Edgar, please move the slides. He's the background, and Lovely is going to be in the chat with you, answering questions, giving you what you need in order to make sure this works. So if no one has any particular challenges, then maybe we should wrap this whole thing down right now, but we won't. We'll continue. But feel free to, throughout the session, go ahead and put any of those things in the chat and we'll bring them up, okay? All right, so let's get started. What exactly is scaling, okay? There's business growth and there is business scaling. And we sometimes hear those two words together as if they're the same. So I think in order for us to really understand and get value from today's conversation, I think the first thing needs to be understanding the difference between growing and scaling. So business growth is about increasing your top line revenue. It's about growing the business at any cost. And that's really depending upon what stage of business that you currently are in. That may just be what you need to be doing. Just grow, 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 grow. So that's a really good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just that it's not the same as scaling. Scaling is when you are growing, you're increasing all that you're doing, particularly your revenues, by minimizing the costs. So effectively, basically improving your bottom line or the profit margin. So you want to growth is just growing, so it means your costs and for growing is the same amount, the ratio is the same amount as what you're bringing in, versus scaling where you are increasing your revenues, growing in that capacity, but you're being efficient with how much it costs to be able to grow. So let's go and see a visual. This is a slide of what a company that is growing without scale might look like. So on the left, you have sort of the numbers, what they're bringing in revenue, and on the right is the costs, okay? And you can kind of see where the costs are growing at the same amount or the same rate as the revenues coming in. So over year 1, 2, 3, 4, you see some great growth, which is fantastic. You also see, though, the ratio between the revenue and the cost, meaning the profits are not really growing. So the growth, the revenue is growing, but the profits are not growing. So this is growth without scale. Again, growth is fine depending upon the stage of business that you are in. But this is what growth without scale looks like. The next slide will show you what growth with scale looks like. So you'll see the revenue is coming in. The costs are also still increasing, but they are not increasing at the same level as the revenues. So you begin to see the chart with the profits that begins to show you that we basically have more increased profits than we have with growth with no scale. So just to compare them side by side, you'll see the it's more of a, it's not quite a hockey stick, but it definitely is more of a hockey stick at the bottom than at the top with no scale. So understanding that. So before we go on, does everyone get that? Does everyone see the difference between growth and scale? Just say, yes, I get it. I see it. I understand it. Just put the yes, thumbs up. I get it. I understand it. Just so that I know that, I'm not just talking too quickly. All right. Any comments I can't see your comments, by the way. So Edgar is the one who's going to sort of manage that in case if someone does make a comment or a question. So feel free to put that in there as well. Okay, so moving on. So clearly then you're dealing with a margins issue, right? So it's important for us to sort of talk about revenues versus margins. So I think it's really important to kind of think about a company that has low revenues but has high margins, maybe has a capacity more to be able to scale than a company that has really high revenues but low margins. Why? Well, before we go on, let me just put that in again. If company A has low revenues but has a high margin, they're more likely to be able to scale than a company with company B who has high revenue but low margins. Why is that the case? Because a company that has high margins is able to invest into the growth of the business more. So next slide. So more margins means cash to invest in the growth. Whereas if you have high revenues, but low margins, the cash that's coming into the business can only be invested into maintaining your current level. Whereas if you have low revenue, but high margins, you have some ability to bring in. So that's one of the things where we want to focus and realize that you're paying attention to your margins, your revenue, your costs, your profits to determine if you are even in a place where you can scale. So we're going to provide for you a worksheet, next slide, that's going to be available for you to use to sort of assess where your business is in terms of your profit margins, your revenue, your profits, to determine what you're dealing with and what's the picture of your company right now. So Lovely is going to put a link in the chat that's going to give you a place to go to. It's a Google document. Once you go there, all you need to do is save the doc for yourself, and then you can then basically copy it and save it, and then be able to use it. It's a monthly, it's really, really great. It has 4 tabs in there. You'll have a sample of how you can use it. You'll have the actual template itself. We'll also give you, I think on tab 3, there's some suggestions of different types of expenses that might come in. So I'd really like to encourage you to sort of use this as a way to be able to assess really what your margins are. Because look, if you're talking about trying to scale, but if you don't know what you're looking at by way of your costs, your profits, your margins, then you don't have the intelligence data to be able to determine if you can scale versus if you're just growing. Okay, so the link is going to be in the chat. Definitely download that. And then also, if you, for some reason, while you're doing your growth and scaling process, need some assistance, or would like to hear some more value from us, then I would like to recommend that you schedule a 30-minute conversation with myself. And through this, you could be able to then kind of have a conversation with me, show me what your plan is by way of your growth and scale process, and it'll allow for us to be able to help you further. All right, and that link is going to be in the chat as well. All right, so let's move on. So the ultimate goal of a founder is to scale their business operations. And I just want to sort of get a sense, by the way, is the sound, can you guys hear me well? Is the sound working well? Because I feel like maybe it may not be as the sound may not be as good for you. So just want to check. Can you hear me well? Give me a thumbs up. Everyone can hear, see, understand. If there's any problems, please put that in the chat. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any challenges. Okay. We'll go ahead and get started. All right. So the ultimate goal of a founder. Yes, you can hear me well. Great. Thank you, Andrea. There's ultimate goal of a founder. Let's go back to that second slide. Is for you, a founder, is to scale your business operations and to maximize profits. So that means scaling. Now, I kind of want to put a caveat. If you're in the early stages of your business and there's a life cycle of business. I talk about this, I think, at every founder's check-in. There's a life cycle. So the stage of business where you're at might be where it's just grow, 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 grow. Forget about scaling, just get this thing moving. But so growth is good. I don't want to ever feel like growth is not a good thing. What I am saying, though, the ultimate goal for founders is to scale their business operations and to maximize profits. So that is the conversation we're going to now jump into now that we understand the difference between growth and scale. So the next slide would be, there are many obstacles that can happen when you are beginning to expand a business. And sometimes we go in very like Pollyanna, like, oh, I'm going to grow my business, I'm going to scale it, and blah, blah, blah. But you don't know often what are things that are ahead of you. What are some of the challenges? So if you don't know what some of the challenges are that you could be facing, then you don't know how to mitigate those things before you get started. So I'm going to run through about 15 challenges that you must pay attention to and that are very common when a company is scaling. And so to bring those to the forefront so you can be thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about this. Yes, I need to pay attention to this. Okay. So by the way, before we do this, what are you doing in your business? Are you growing or are you scaling? Growing or scaling? Now that you know the difference between growing and scaling, just put in the biz through in the chat. Right now I'm growing, right now I'm scaling. Or if right now you're early days and you're like, I'm just trying to get this business to do a thing, just say, neither I'm just working on the business or I'm, trying to get things, I'm trying to, figure out what I need to do to get my product out there. It's okay if you're not, in those post stages, but most of the people that usually come to the founders check-in are somewhere in the stages where they're growing the business and either or moving into scaling, or they're currently scaling and they're dealing with some challenges. So any comments? What are you doing? Are you growing? Are you scaling? Anyone in the chat? Okay, fine. We'll keep it moving. All right. So one problem is scaling too quickly. That is a huge problem. So what do I mean by that? You're like, Kerry-Ann. Okay, we've got someone at the early stages. Okay. All right. So you're before growth, beginning to put some things. So if you're at that stage, then I think this is a perfect time. I'm at the early stages working to get my biz out there. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Anything else? All right. So, like, if you're at the early stages, then this is good because then you can create some more fundamental things in the business that will allow for you to put into place some things that will make sure when it's time to scale, you're doing it in the best way possible. So, one thing would be early, you're trying to scale too early. Scaling too early is a big problem because if you don't have, again, if you're skipping over early stages, if you're skipping over growth stage, if you're jumping straight to scaling stage without doing any of the work ahead of time, you will not be able to sustain any growth. So what does this look like? You're like, well, how can I, how would I be scaling if I'm early stages? Well, it's almost like if you have a big, like, say you have this great product, okay, and you're just in the early stages of putting, formulating the business and all this type of thing, and but someone say at Target sees your great product and they're like, oh no, we want you to sell your great product here at Target. Well, you'd be like, yes, fantastic, let's do this. And I would say, if you were my client, I'd say, no, you don't have the capacity, right? Because to be able to scale, one must be able to have systems in place, processes in place. Do you know when you're going to produce it? Where's the manufacturer? Do you have enough capacity to be able to produce it fast enough? So these are the problems that are about scaling too quickly. Okay, the next one would be mistaking growth for scale. I think I've hammered that home enough. The reason why I keep putting that is I want to make sure you get it. Like, mistaking growth for scale. Growth and scale are two different things. Very important things, but also in the part of really making sure that you are doing it the right way and not thinking you're growing, not scaling, when you think you're scaling and you're not growing. Okay, so next one, unable to fulfill customer demands. This is what I was talking about when you're saying you're scaling too quickly. If you're scaling too quickly, then you don't have the capacity to fulfill your customers' demands. I will tell you a story of one of my hard knock stories in my business. So when I started my business back into the 2014, well, I started the business before that, but when I went full time into it in 2014, it was great. I mean, I was just really getting a lot of clients and things were moving along really lovely. I was able to secure one of my largest contracts probably 2 years in. And I was so excited. And I thought that I really had done a good job of staffing up, having enough people on the team, working out how we were going to fulfill. But in the end, I did not have enough people to fulfill the contract, and didn't have enough people that had the capacity, like the skill sets, to fulfill some parts of the contract. So a year later, I'm having to have a very embarrassing come to Jesus conversation with the CEO of the company because we were not able to fulfill the strategic demands of what it is that we promised to do. Obviously, we were able to do some of the basic things, but the kinds of things that would have really pushed the contract over, we weren't able to do. And to be honest with you, that was such an embarrassing moment for me, and it took me a little while to get over it. So I really think it's important to recognize that if you don't have the capacity to fulfill what you are selling, even though it looks like a great contract and it's going to push you over the top, don't do it. Because if you don't have it, you can't do it. And then basically you're going to ruin your reputation. You're going to lose money and it's just going to be an awful situation. Okay. Cash flow challenges. So cash flow, like, scaling does cost money. We talked about that, investing money into the business from your revenues, from your profits so that you can grow. But cash flow, but scaling does cost money in the sense that, for instance, let's say you are a product-based company and, say Target comes to call and say, hey, we want to sell your products in the store. You're going to have to upfront the costs to your manufacturers to make sure that they can produce the products so you can ship them to Target, so you can have the marketing necessary, all the things that are necessary to be able to make sure that you can scale with this contract. Therefore, if you're not managing the costs and the cash flow, making sure that, because I mean, you're going to recoup the money in the end, but you still have to upfront the front. That causes cash flow problems. So that's one example of a cash flow problem when you're scaling. So we really need to be thinking about how you manage your money and how is it going in and out of the business when you are scaling. What's another problem of scaling? Not having a good product market fit. And I know you might be thinking, well, if I am at the point where I'm growing, then I probably do have a good product market fit. That may not be true. Just because you have a great product that there are, 100 people in the world who love that product and therefore your company is growing. But it may be that you only have that 100 people in the world that need your product, so you cannot scale. So could they create a financial loss? In terms of what in terms of what would that question be? Could they create a financial loss? Expound on that question, because I do want to answer that question. Just go ahead and expound on that question. I'm sorry, and I will answer it. So yes, not so you want to make sure that your product market fit is strong, meaning you have. So here's a question you want to ask yourself: is there enough? Is there enough people out there? Is there a strong enough market out there for your particular product that if you built it, there would be enough people to be able to just to sustain that kind of a business? And if that's not the case, then you do not have strong product market fit, and that's not a good. It's not a foundation for scaling. So what do you do then? You sort of do some tweaking. Okay. The next problem is that you're facing would be still trying to make all the decisions in your business. I know how you entrepreneurs are because I'm one, but you look at your business as as your baby, and you're in there and you're making all the decisions and you're the one, but you end up being the bottleneck. All the growth that you're happening, if you can't be the one, if you can't delegate and say, hey, this person can make a decision in the business, that person can make decision in the business, then you basically don't have a scalable company, period, done. It's not possible. Frankly, to be honest, I could have moved this to be the first one because that is a large part of obstacles that I have noticed with people trying to scale, that they're still trying to make all the decisions in the business. You can't do it if you're going to scale. So the next one would be similar to that, not changing your management issues as the growth happens. So for instance, if you are, okay, before we go here, correction, could the second point create a financial loss? This is in relation to the point of having to go back to the CEO and explain not being able to meet the promised expectations. Yes, right. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. Because let's say, very good, very, very, very good question. So for instance, the way the contract was created was there was going to be a base amount, and so we were doing some things that were a part of the contract, and those things we did. There were some additional things that would then add additional commission to the contract, that had we done this would have been the commission. So with that being said, I was projecting a certain amount of commission in the business, and not just, so the contract read that they were going to have to pay us for this for just basic services, and so that's what happened. But the commission part got lost because we didn't have, I mean, we got some commission but not enough to make it to hit the projections that we had. So it became a financial loss for our business because we were projecting a certain amount. We did not get that, therefore. But let's assume that the contract you have with, say you're a service-based company, you have a contract with a company and another business, and the way your contract reads requires you to say you have to fulfill but so much, but there's a penalty clause in it. then that's like not just projection dollars. That's like actual real cash being pulled out of your coffers, and that is a problem. So the idea here of sort of scaling too quickly is a real big problem, and you need to really, really pay attention to it. So good. Thank you for making that correction. I appreciate that. Okay, so not changing management issues as the growth grows. So let's go back to the slide right before this. The slide right before this was still trying to make all the decisions on your own. So that's the founders who are like, my baby, I can't leave my business. I can't delegate. I can't leave without it being imploding. Everything has to run through me. That's madness. That's crazy. I know the feeling. So that's one. On the flip side is the next slide, not changing the management issues as the growth occurs. So maybe you have grown and you have brought in a good management team, or you have a team of folks who really are, doing well when you were growing in the growth stage or even in the early stages. But now that you're scaling, there's some additional problems, right? Every new part of life and business has additional problems. But because you're so like, wait, I've got a great team, they're doing well, not paying attention to the issues that happens when you're scaling and not addressing them, that is a big obstacle to scaling, and it will keep you small. All right. So anyone had a challenge with that? Any questions regarding the things that we've talked about so far? Okay. So the next one is failure to identify the brand voice and value proposition. Now, I know that people are like, well, I've already figured out what my voice is in the business. I know who we're speaking to. I know who my ideal client is. I know what my value proposition is. I am going to push a bit there. I have found that even if you think you know, you actually don't know. I can't tell you how many times a business who thinks that they have a very strong brand identity, has a very strong, you ask them what your value proposition is, and they say it, and you're sitting there like, but what exactly do you do? It's really when you're speaking about value proposition and identifying brand identity and brand voice, that is really like you need to be speaking to someone who's like a Neanderthal, and they don't like someone who doesn't even like know anything should be able to get that. So that's a really important problem. If you don't have that really clear, when you start to scale, it's like, what does that company do? Because you're not clear. So, I mean, have you ever interacted with a company like, what exactly do they do? Right? Sometimes I walk around like someone like I see a company, I'm like, I'm still not sure what they do. If that's a question, then that means they don't have a strong identity, brand voice, or a value proposition. So anyone who's in the audience right now who's listening or is watching, even if you did it live, if you're watching the recording of this, have you ever experienced a company where you're like, I don't know who they serve, what they serve, what's the point of their company? Have you experienced that kind of a situation? Or like, what's the value that, or maybe I get emails all the time from companies saying, hey, I can come in your business and help. And I read like 2 or 3 emails. And I'm like, I still don't know what it is that you do. Anyone had that experience? Okay. If you have, put in the chat, we'll pull it back up. So that's another problem with scaling, because if you're having that problem when you're in the early days of just growth or setting things up, it's going to look really bad come scaling time. Okay. Next slide is your talent shortage, meaning you are having a hard time hiring. You're not hiring well, you're not hiring at all. You're not hiring. So you can't scale if you don't have a team. The team is the backbone of a strong, scalable business. So if you are trying to grow and you don't have a team and you're not hiring team, then I really can't help you there. You're gonna have to just like bite the bullet. And everyone's like, oh, well, yes, hiring a team is expensive. Yes, you do have to actually provide, consistent payroll. Yes, yes, yes. And how do you plan to build this on your own or with a very tiny team, a team that's not relevant, not enough to support where you're trying to get it to. So I really do want to just sort of talent shortage is a big problem. On the flip side, the next slide is you're hiring for quantity, not quality. Too many times, actually, it's one of the reasons why people come to me is they're having an issue with their team. They hired so many people, but the quality of the people that they've hired is not strong. And I only blame the owner, the founder, the leader of the organization. I don't ever blame the people that are in your company because you're the one who hired, you're the one who determined, who you wanted to bring into the company. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you take a look and say, okay, what's happening in the company? What kind of team do I need to build to make this work? At what stage of the company growth do I need to start building a team? Who do I need to build a team for? What is the role that I need? What kind of qualifications do I need to have? And then how do you grow them into becoming even stronger and better at what they're doing? So don't just hire because. So on the one side is you're not hiring enough. The other side is you're hiring too much, but you're not hiring quality. Okay. And then the next problem that I found with scaling, can my team consist of contract net? Yes, you can. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think this is something that's really interesting. In the early days, like now that is different than, maybe companies say 15, 20 years ago. It was difficult to find contract specialists or whatever. But if you're working with people who are confident, I just really believe you want to have a mixture. So for instance, if you're going to hire contractors, still hire them on a full-time basis, because in the end you want to give them some amount of security if you can, even if you're hiring early days. So if you're hiring a freelancer or a contractor, having at least one or two people who are really there full time to manage it. And then you can, if you need, for instance, an additional marketing expert who, maybe you couldn't afford that level of marketing. You sort of like, you can have sort of like a fractional marketing person that's coming in and doing a certain skill in the business, a certain task in the business, and then they're only doing it for like a couple hours per week based on what you need in the business. That's perfectly fine. But I do think that you want to at least start with having an assistant start first there, bring that in full time. Also too, it strengthens your muscle to know that you have payroll, right? I mean, you have to start thinking, because the big fear is, well, what if I don't meet payroll? That's the biggest scary thing. Like, what if I can't meet payroll this month, right? And I understand that's a fear. But if you don't start strengthening the muscle and you realize, wait, I have to meet payroll this month, then you don't ever get there, and then you don't ever build. So yes, you can have a team of contract network of specialists, of people, particularly fractional, like, you might have a fractional CFO, you may have a fractional HR person, those kinds of things, who, you wouldn't be able to hire them full time if you couldn't, but you want to start building a full-time team that's working with you, start with your assistants, maybe move into another person and start building from there. All right, perfect. Yes. I'm glad to see that. All right, so next stage, next slide. You're not having a solid process for getting new clients. If you don't have a consistent process for getting new clients, you cannot start scaling. If that's the most important part of developing and setting things up for your business, is knowing what's your process for getting new clients. And so what I would like to recommend, if you did not watch the founders check-in last month, go ahead and watch that we helped you to create a mapping to map your process for sales in your business so that you can be able to create some consistent processes for getting new clients. So Lovely is going to put that link in the chat. That's the link to the founders check-in from the sales mapping process that we did. I believe that was last month. Okay, so yes, interesting. It sure is, isn't it? Okay. The next stage, the next problem and obstacle is, oh, I'm so glad. I am so glad to hear that. That I mean, really, it's kind of a thing, but it takes you some time to do it. But once you do it, it's like it's marketing. Yes. For those of you that did not come from last time, this marketing is sort of the term that we started using. It's the idea here that you can combine your marketing, or you're at least informing your marketing with your sales process in a way that makes sense for your business. So the hashtags marketing became our fun thing. So yeah, the link is there. Lovely's going to put in the chat if you want to go ahead and link there after we finish today. Take a look, read, watch the founders check-in, and really, and there's a worksheet in there. I think the link is there too, so do that. We want to have a solid process for getting new clients. Period. Done. It must happen. Okay. Next slide. Your core values are not known to you. You don't know what your core values are. Your team doesn't know what your core values are. No one knows what the core values of the business is. I know that sounds very much like, oh, I can do that later when I'm bigger. No, do it now. As you grow, it's like, what does the Bible say? Train up a child in the way they should grow and they will not depart from it. It's sort of like that. If you don't have a foundational values in your business, as you grow and as you scale, you will forget what your values are. So, and if you don't have core values, if you haven't created them, I'm going to recommend that you go and look at the strategic planning process, founders farmers market. I'm thinking about food right now. Founders check-in from 2 months ago, so that because there we helped you create your core strategic goals, your values, your core values, and your purpose. And we have a whole process for that. If anyone in the group attended the strategic planning process thing that we did 2 months ago, I believe it was, put something in there. But Lovely's going to put the link for the strategic planning process founders check-in in the chat. If you haven't figured out where your core values are to your people, in your business, and your team doesn't know it and you don't know it, then I'm going to recommend you that. I'm telling you, you might be thinking this is a little bit more highfalutin, then you're like, well, I don't need all that. You do not want to grow without being certain about what it is you believe in, what your company believes in, what are some of the deal breakers, out of the non-negotiables in your business, or else it will just become a thing that you don't really know once it's grown. Okay. The next problem that I have found with scaling is losing focus. That goes back to the strategic planning. That's why I'm also putting that out there. Look at the strategic planning process founders check-in, because losing focus, if you create your whole strategies, you know what your core purpose, you know what your core plan strategic objective is, then it's less likely that you will go scatterbrain. When I say scatterbrain, when you're growing and when you're scaling, everyone on the team is going to come up with something else, like, oh, maybe we should do this, maybe we should do that, and oh, here's an innovative new thing. It gets you sort of losing the focus of why you're here, what you're doing, and start thinking about other things to do in the effort of scaling. And it makes sense. Sometimes someone will come to you and say, hey, we have this new product. Like, for instance, right now we've got AI happening. Yeah, I really believe that AI is going to help so many businesses thrive and grow and scale. You just need to know where you want to put it in, but you don't want to get all like focus and say, oh no, we're going to create an AI division. Yes, pay attention and see if that's something that you want to begin to fit into your business model, but you don't want to lose your focus so that you forget about what your core product is, where it fits, who your customer is, what your strategic goals are when you are scaling. Okay. And the next problem that you might face is forgetting that trimming the fat is part of scaling. So, the whole purpose of like when you're in the process of scaling, you're going to constantly be paying attention to the inefficiencies. You want to be as lean as you possibly can, that because that's where the profit margin exists, right? Decreasing costs, increasing revenue. So just because you began this process and said, okay, let me, figure out how to make this thing lean in the beginning. And as you are scaling, you forget about it. You want to pay attention right in the immediate stages about, okay, how can you conserve on resources? So if you do begin to bring in a team, making sure that your team is, being efficient, making sure that you're not having them do things that would not make sense, or that you don't have to necessarily do, or that can be automated. So you want to sort of look at seeing, okay, what are the things that are costing money in the business, not just how are you overlaying, how much are you outlaying in the business in cash, but how are you using those resources in the business? Do you have a zillion and one different apps that you're using for marketing? Do you need them all? So as you grow, as you scale, trim, trim, trim. So not just the beginning, but while you are scaling, you're trimming and trimming and trimming, and you will find that that will allow you to scale. So those are the top 14 or 15 problems that I have found that could be obstacles if you don't pay attention to them when you start the process of beginning to scale. So now that we have a sense of what they are, before we move into the next step, any of these popped up for you and you're like, I did not think that that could be a problem for scaling, or I'm so glad that that was mentioned, or yes, I am experiencing that very scale, that very problem right now. What, any of these obstacles rang true for you, or made you realize you wanted to sort of fix them? All right, we've got a awesome, awesome, awesome. Anyone else? Any of these problems, sort of, and maybe, you might want to say how you've sort of fixed it. Maybe you've identified in your business and you wanted to fix it. You found a way to fix it. Um, okay, so basically, here are a good set of problems you want to be thinking about. It's one of the big problem, like one of the things you need to pay attention to. So now I'm going to move into what are some of the things you need to be paying attention, like to actually make sure you have in place while you are scaling. Okay, so if you're thinking, am I ready to scale? Here's how you can tell. One, you've got a strong market fit. We talked about this, your product. You have the question you want to ask yourself again is, does your product or your service provide a solution to a pervasive problem that to a strong enough market? Now, when I say, that's why I use the word strong enough market and not like a massive market. Yes, it needs to be a massive market, to be frank. But if you are, for instance, if you have a product that is very niche, where it's only for nurses that have curly hair and have have sciatica and can't stand because their curly hair is so heavy. I don't know. Like, it's very niche, but yet it is so niche that the problem is so pervasive for that niche, then you could scale. You could scale. But if it's like, if it's like 5 people in the world that, have that could purchase your product, then it's not a model for scale. And I think, and it's unfortunate, right? I mean, you may want to do that. You may decide to build a business just for that, just because it makes sense. So for instance, there are pharmaceutical companies that have what they call orphan drugs, and they create these orphan drugs because it's like a small number of people in the world that have that disease that that drug actually helps to address or whatever. and it's not profitable enough. So they sometimes don't put it out there in the market. Of course, you and I can have a long conversation about, whether or not that's good or fair or right or ethical or whatever. But there are things where if you have a product that could actually help people, but it's not enough people, you can decide to create a business around that. But what I'm saying is that you can't really look at it at scale, or you probably need like, they just you can't look at it as a scale. It could be something you do that, okay, I've got a client, I've got a group of people that can buy the product, but it's not a scalable model. Okay. All right. The second thing that you want to make sure that you're asking yourself and you make sure you have in place in your business before you start to scale: strong systems and processes. I know you hate that word. So many people, like when my clients come to me, they're just like, I don't want to do the process, systems, blah, blah, blah. But that is where the money is. That's where the beauty of being able to scale does. Because, okay, you start thinking about how can you be able to create, bring your costs down by making sure that you're not wasting time on repetitive tasks in the business, things that you can automate, things that you can say. You don't have to perpetually be thinking about what the decision tree is around a particular decision in a business. If it's a system or process already existing, you figured out how to do it. You don't have to continue to do it. Your team does not have to continue to do it. It's just a way of being in the company. Strong systems and processes is the number one way that you can be certain that you can scale and not just grow. So start that process. Whatever it is, and every component in your business should have a strong process and a strong system. Yeah, exactly. Right. No one loves it. They hate it. People hate it. But this is what being a leader in your business is. Okay. So number 3, making sure that you have a scalable business model. So this happens a lot with you kind of created a business because someone said, oh, you're great at this, and they decided to do it, but then you didn't really think about it. Can I make this really scalable? So before you start to talk about scaling, you want to start looking at the actual business model that you're in. Sometimes you don't have to blow up the business and say, oh, it's not a scalable model, I'm done. But you might need to tweak it. So for you guys, majority of folks that are attracted to me are companies that are in the service-based industry, professional services, as well as other types of services. And so that means that service-based industries it's troubling because you're now sometimes, if there may be a 1-to-1 thing, or a 5-to-1 thing. And so I remember one of my clients who we're doing some strategic planning actually right now, and on one contract there could be, say, 15 people on his team that are working on one contract. Now these are very large, 7-figure contracts, but they're still large. But there's still a lot of people that are invested in the particular product. So how do you create a scalable business as a service-based company when it requires human beings to actually fulfill? Now, and I would say one of the things you may want to consider doing is first, obviously the part of the grow stage of the business, right? Is you are just, doing what you do, just getting the fulfillment out there. However, you want to then start looking and saying, how can you create more of a product, depending on the industry you're in, create the service that you have as more of a product than so this is how option 1, option 2, option 3, that alone gives you some amount of control over what it costs for each thing to do. Once you do that, then you bake in the actual costs of doing product 1. So when you're pricing it out, it's priced out in a way that makes it profitable and scalable. The other thing could be around how you providing some do-it-yourself type products in your company, so that you obviously have your service-based products where you are the one, or you and your team are the ones performing, but there's an ability to sort of purchase a thing. Licensing your products is a really good way to also make it a scalable. So if you're doing any sort of instructions, teachings, whatever, being able to maybe have something where your client can purchase the license of your content or of your product of the educational product from you. That is another way to be able to make it scalable. The point is, this workshop is not about how to make a business product, not how to make a company scalable. It's to begin to make sure you recognize that you're building on a model that is scalable. Okay. And then number 4 is you want to make sure you have evidence of strong growth before you begin to start talking about, oh, I'm going to scale. No, just have some consistent evidence of strong growth in your business. So for those of you that said early on, hey, I'm beginning the stages right now of sort of putting things together, perfect. This is a time to start putting things together in a way that you are now consistently seeing growth on a regular basis. You have a consistent sales and acquisition process. You have a consistent way of fulfilling. You have a consistent way of getting people to purchase. And I would say go back to the sales planning process link. Lovely put that in link again for those of you who may just be jumping on. You want to make sure that you have a process to be able to make sure that you have the growth you need. Once you have that, you will then know that you can start scaling. And then number 5 is having a consistent client acquisition process. Once you have, like we talked about this earlier, but if you don't have a consistent client acquisition process, you just can't really start the process of scaling. You need to have that in place. So I'm going to just review all these 5 things that you need to think about. If am I ready to scale? Starting with number 1, making sure you have a strong market fit. Number 2, having strong systems and processes in the business. Number 3, having a scalable business model. By the way, number 2, the strong systems and processes support you no longer being in the business as much as you need to be, as much as you may already currently are. If you need to be in the business all the time and you need to be all the decisions and you're in it, then it's not scalable. So that's a part of the process and systems that take into place. Okay, number 4, evidence of strong growth. So before you start thinking about scaling, every industry is different. So I can't say, oh, when you hit this number, once you hit that number, then it's time to start scaling. But you definitely need to be hitting a good number that allows for you. So like some businesses, 100,000 might be a good number to show that you have good growth. Some businesses might be, getting to the million so you can see that you have good growth. Edgar asked me this question before we came on. He said, does every company need to scale? And the answer is no. You don't necessarily every company doesn't need to scale, but the thing about businesses like if you're growing or dying, you got to figure out what you want your business to be and create a growth map for it. And I do that a lot with actually clients, sort of creating a growth map so you can sort of see what the trajectory of the business will be. And determining where you think you'll be doing growing at what stage, and then what stage are you going to be scaling, sort of a hockey stick analogy, right? Also determining what you want to do for your own business. So just because someone else, Facebook scaled this way and someone else scaled that way, I want to scale like them. No, you scale the way you and whoever is in your business want to scale, but you just need to know what it is so that you can plan accordingly and put into place these types of things. Okay. And then the 5th, making sure that you have the consistent client acquisition process in place. So these are the 5 things that I would say spend some time looking at as you begin to think about scaling, but paying attention to your revenues, your profit margins, all the things that we talked about in the worksheet. Definitely download them. Lovely. Put the link again for the worksheet in there. Pull that down. Make sure you are paying attention to what those numbers are looking like so you can be able to tell, are you even growing or are you scaling or what you're doing? So that's really it. All right. We've given you 14 obstacles and problems to face when it comes to scaling. We've given you some things to consider to decide when you need to scale and how you can be able to address those problems. So if you have any questions right now, now would be a good time to type them in the chat. If there are any questions about everything that we've talked about now. And again, if you would like for me to review your scaling and growth plan, if you'd like to have a conversation around how you are projecting things forward, or if you're wondering like I'm not really sure my profit margin. By the way, if you're trying to figure out what your profit percentage your profit margin is, there is a website. It is because NYU has a website. I can't remember the actual. I might put that into the chat once this recording is finished, where you can go and see what is an average profit margin for your industry. It's a great chart. It lists all of the industries out there, and then it'll give you what would be a standard profit margin. So, for instance, like banks, those percentages are high. If you're not in the banking industry, you may want to go ahead and start a bank. But for instance, the airlines, it's like I think less than 1%. So you do need to know what's average in your industry and the country that you're in so that you can kind of decide, okay, based on this is how much I should be falling into before you start saying, oh, I want 50% profit margin when your industry can't hold that, right? So that's also too. But it's you can Google it. It's the NYU profit margin chart. But once we are finished with this particular founder check-in, I'll go ahead and put that in link as well. All right. So if there are any questions, we do this once a month. Okay. And the founders check-in is basically, we call it your monthly dose of small business strategy. And we do this because we really believe in small businesses and the growth of small businesses. So small and medium-sized businesses. And so we're here for you. If you'd like to schedule a call with me, definitely it's in the link. In the link is in the chat. Lovely's put that in there. Schedule that. I would say that schedule it though for a purpose. If you're like, hey, Kerry-Ann, I'm in the process of doing my scale and growth, and here's what I have. Can you take a look? For the next founders check-in, we normally do it the first Thursday of every month. This week, obviously, we're doing it the second Thursday of this month simply because, well, other things, but it's the first Thursday of every month. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow the Trafalgar Strategies company page. Obviously, you can also connect with me as a contact on LinkedIn. But and if you are listening to this live versus listening to it recorded, feel free to put that in the chat so we can kind of get a sense of what you're doing. But until then, if there are no questions, Edgar? No? Yes? No? If there are no questions, we're going to sign off for this time. See you next month. Bye-bye.